Good evening, and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Amanda Vinicky. Illinois' governor is pushing for changes to an embattled Chicago agency.
Look, a lot of changes are going to have to take place. There's no doubt at CTA.
Ghost buses and a looming deficit. Could it be the end of the road for Dorval Carter as the governor calls for new leadership at the CTA?
And if someone's intent is to exploit and divide us, they are racking up the scoreboard. Nothing about what's happening now is telling them, hey, we should chill on the buses.
Despite that divide, Chicago agrees to spend millions more to care for migrants. This as fallout over the police killing of Dexter Reed leads to sparring and scrutiny over CPD investigations.
Parents and Chicago voters deserve to have a voice when decisions are being made that would cause potential irreparable and irreversible damage to their schools.
The CTU takes a hit as it prepares to drive a hard bargain for its next contract. And in sports, shy Barbies blowing into the Windy City's sky. We look at the future of the WNBA. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Tina Spondelis of the Chicago Sun-Times, Kim Bellware of the Washington Post, Shia Kapis of Politico, and Annie Costable, also of the Chicago Sun-Times. Thanks to each of you. Now we're going to get right to some pretty fresh news, actually. After some delay this afternoon, it went through, and we're talking about funding from the city for migrants. It was a vote 30-18 to spend about $70 million on migrant care. Shia, start with you. Why has this money been so controversial?
Controversial because it's money from the city revenue, and they don't have a lot of money to spend. What was most telling today was how divided the council was. It became very racially focused, the debate today. A lot of black aldermen didn't want the funding to go through because they have people in their community who they say, where's mine? And others—
They've been waiting.
They've been waiting. The big picture is the mayor, Tony Preckwinkle, who pushed for this, wants to look at this as a big city issue. The Democratic convention is coming. Each alderman has to think beyond their ward. So it ultimately passed, but it was very divisive.
You know, Kim, you pay attention and keep your eye on what's going on nationally. There are other cities that have migrants sent their way from Texas. Are we seeing these sort of racial fissures elsewhere, or is this a particularly Chicago?
It is so unique to Chicago because of our history with segregation, the way that our neighborhoods continue to be segregated. You know, New York is having its own battles. You see this also somewhat in cities in Colorado and in California. But really, I think ours is pretty specific because of our unique and historic dynamic. And just like Shia said, you know, there are communities that have been trying to get services, trying to get support for a long time for their residents. And now when it's time to kind of shake out the couch cushions for money, they're wondering, why can you find it for this moment, but not for ongoing or existing residents?
Did they receive any guarantees, Shia?
Well, the next measure that they passed was $1.2 billion that will be TIF money that will go to everybody. So
$1.2 billion,
you could
that's
say,
more than $70 million.
Say they got something in a way, and a lot of those aldermen who had rejected the migrant measure approved this one. So,
and both of those issues were delayed when they were supposed to have been voted on earlier in the week. What changed?
The big delay in the $1.2 billion funding was the mayor says, I want discretion to approve things $5 million and more. And a lot of aldermen said, oh, that's a lot of money. We think if it's that much money, you ought to drop that to $1 million. If it's a $1 million project, we want to have some say in how that money is spent. And so there was a big debate about whether to approve that $1 million or not. That didn't pass. Council very divided, so it passed the way the mayor wanted. There are two big wins for the mayor on that today.
Two big wins for the mayor as he is going to be on center stage as the Democratic National Convention heads to Chicago in some 120 days or so, give or take. Tina, let's turn to you. There were some prominent Democrats that were in Chicago this week preparing for the DNC. What did they have to say about this situation of migrants, protesters, very visible situations that could put a hamper in their plans to have a very smooth convention?
Yeah, we did have some of the states or the country's top Democratic state leaders in Chicago this week for meetings, internal meetings. They toured the United Center in McCormick Place, got a lay of the land. They also discussed some rules, but we did ask them, we said, hey, you're coming into a city where the migrant crisis, we don't know if there'll be buses that just show up in front of the United Center or wherever the security parameter is, or protests.
Sort of intentional needling, perhaps,
yes,
by Republicans.
We are expecting that. So they kind of downplayed that. They said, we are a big tent party and we are going to welcome these migrants just as we have been. There's no talk of how are we going to fund the incoming arrivals, which we've been dealing with for how many years. No real talk about that. But they kind of downplayed it, said that they were united, that they were ready for everything. And they also discussed Gaza and the protesters, and they also said, we're going to let them protest, we're going to let them have their First Amendment rights. It might be a repeat of what we saw earlier this week. I think Annie saw the protesters on Monday, potentially.
Yeah, I think as an outside observer to the situation, it's hard to have confidence in that when, you've seen how the city has handled protests in the past. There's not a lot of confidence in the fact that they'll handle this positively when the DNC is here.
But I think they did handle it positively. If you look at, they let the protesters have their say, and then they got shuttled away. And,
right, they will do that. They'll arrest them. They'll let them protest for an hour. They'll arrest them. And I did ask them. I said, it's not just the security parameter. It's not McCormick Place, United Center, this area where they think protesters are going to just go in a circle and protest. That's not going to happen. We're in a huge city. We have how many neighborhoods? 77 neighborhoods. We don't know where these people will protest, so they need to be ready for that too.
Well, including blocking off access to a major airport. Is that going to be something that Chicago lets stand, and what might that mean? I mean, how many people missed their flights?
Well, the convention people yesterday said, look, sure, it was inconvenient. Protesters blocked O'Hare for a while, and then police dispersed them, and it's over. I think their thinking is people just have to be patient. They're protesters, and it's going to happen, and it'll be in control, I guess.
That's something that
go
I
ahead.
hope that DNC officials are aware of, is this is a city that has a tremendous legacy of protest. I mean, 1968, none of us were around then, but the whole world was watching, and that's something that I think has only grown. I mean, the labor movement is very strong. A lot of progressive protest movements are really strong here, and people are going to come into town for that. Even if they didn't, I think the existing infrastructure of protesters, they are well organized. If they know the city, they're going to know how to be effective and how to be seen. And I would just think that officials should definitely not underestimate that, but also respect that, know that they are dealing with people who know how to put together a protest.
And the convention is chaired by Mignon Moore, who is a Chicago native, who was with Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push organization, who very much understands and respects the protest movement. So I think that they understand that it's part of the convention.
And I think this does, to everyone's point here, also raise questions in terms of the Chicago Police Department, which has said, we are training for this. We assure you that we believe in First Amendment rights. But Kim, speak more about that legacy. Particularly, it has been just over a week now since the release of that video that showed 26-year-old Dexter Reed shooting a Chicago police officer, and then officers responding with really a barrage of fire, the gunfire that is, that killed him. So an investigation into that is underway. But what has this exposed about the investigations process when there is a police-involved shooting?
Well, a lot of it is, kind of what's new is old. Larry Snelling was saying, we're looking into this. We have a system now where we're tracking complaints, problems with officers. But then once reporters dive into that further, you find that process, that system is very new. It probably didn't catch some of these more recent complaints. And this really tracks with something that we've seen with CPD for decades. They get some bad press, something happens, and then they announce reforms, they announce new processes and measures, and then when it comes time to actually show the receipts of that, well, things haven't really been working as well as they should. We are still under a federal monitor after the Quan McDonald shooting, and we went under DOJ investigation, and that has been just filled with setbacks and delays. And so, whatever the CPD says, I think the public does have a right to ask for some actual documentation of, where is the proof? Like, what does it look like? Let us see this process. And this is a problem that's been going on for decades, because in 1968, you can go to the Chicago History Museum and see the artifacts of what the kind of aggressive policing looked like half a century ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's certainly nothing new, and you would think that the CPD would be on particularly high alert. Again, we'll mention the DNC, but also a federal monitor. Anything to be made of Superintendent Larry Snelling, however, his accusations that said the head of the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, or COPA as it's otherwise known, Andrea Kirsten, has been too in front on this, that she has gotten sort of ahead of the investigation before and maybe that officers are being judged by public opinion before they've actually been interviewed.
I think that's
Tina?
Historically, that's the relationship between the superintendent and COPA or whoever is investigating those types of shootings. Like he's supposed to be the leader to say, I support you, keep doing your job. We will, if you do something wrong, we're going to let you know, but we also need you to know that we have your back. So I think that's just the historical relationship.
And perhaps inspiring confidence maybe within the ranks of CPD, something that apparently was not much to be had with the last superintendent. Kim, did you want to weigh in there?
Yeah, I mean, this is also something people have been wanting to see different when it comes to a police accountability, a police oversight board. They don't want them to be a rubber stamp that just agrees with everything that the police department does. So if they do get a little bit of pushback, if they're feeling the heat a little more, that's because this is the oversight board that civilians have been asking for a long time.
Now, let's move to another city agency, and this is one that actually the governor gets some say in, and he, as you heard earlier, the governor has in fact been making his piece known, and that is calling for a change in CTA leadership. Transit advocates have really made a rallying cry to oust Dorval Carter. You even have the Tribune, the Cranes as well, writing op-eds that are calling for Carter's resignation, but Mayor Johnson sticking by him. Shia, why?
Well, because CTA trains are late, buses are late, they don't show up. A lot of it has to do with still recovering from COVID and the fact that fewer people are going downtown, and that's affecting the train system, the bus systems, and also they have an employee, they don't have enough employees, so it's hard to get employees into those into the red line. That's the beginning. That's where train conductors start, is on the red line. It's hard to get new folks in there, and that means things are slower, and it takes a while. And it's something that's happening across the country. Big cities across the country are seeing similar problems with their transportation systems. So even though folks are upset at Dorval Carter isn't the only one experiencing this across the country.
Well, and Tina, the governor doesn't often get out in front on issues like this. Was this calculated? What sort of information do you have in terms of his calling for a change there? Does this expose a new rift, perhaps, between he and Mayor Johnson?
I think yes, because he had been pretty silent about the CTA. He kind of just let Mayor Johnson take all the heat for, post-pandemic, people sleeping on the trains or drugs or people smoking, all the complaints about
late
the
trains,
cleanliness,
ghost buses,
everything that can be. He kind of just was quiet about that, and then now all of a sudden this week he is voicing his opinion and that he does think that Dorval Carter should go. And he does appoint 3 members of the CTA board, so he does have a say. So it is really interesting, as you said, that he's doing this when he's doing it. He's doing it when the public opinion is pretty strong that Dorval Carter has to go. And I don't know if we're going to see that from Brandon Johnson anytime soon.
It seems he was asked about it, to my understanding, at a press conference just minutes ago, and said that he doesn't talk about personnel decisions in public, but seems to continue to be standing by Carter. Anything that either of you want to add, Annie? I don't know. Are you a frequent CTA rider? Just get it right?
I think people in the city just want the CTA to match the greatness of the city, right? Like, people are so passionate about Chicago, and they want the CTA to be available and run smoothly and match the greatness of the city.
Now let's move on a bit. Kim, can you talk about not the only one, Dorval Carter, that is, who might have his job perhaps, but maybe kind of sort of on the skids. A Chicago resident is trying to get voters to sign onto a ballot initiative that would set up a mechanism to recall the mayor of Chicago. He says that, yes, this does have to do with Mayor Johnson. Is recall something that we're going to be seeing anytime soon?
I don't really know. I mean, we've seen this in places like California where they can recall the governor. You know, Chicago has not had a mechanism to recall the mayor. This is why it's being introduced now. But, you know, I don't know. I want to hear from Tina on this because I feel like this is really, you know, your...
I was surprised actually at the coverage of this, that it was kind of like in the back of the paper. I thought more people would be like more riled up because there are a lot of people who are upset at the mayor for various things. So I do think it's indicative of a certain voice in our city, and I believe this was a Lakeview person. So some issues in his area that he's really upset about, and he feels that he can have a voice on it.
She, the mayor, pretty dismissive.
Yeah, he kind of laughed it off. But it's hard to laugh it off when you do have a former governor, Pat Quinn, behind it. And this is kind of an issue that Pat Quinn is passionate about in reforms like this. So I can see why he's behind it. I don't know.
In his case, not perhaps aimed at Johnson, more just believing in...
But the big picture of having this kind of option for voters. He thinks regular folks should have an option to, you know, do thumbs up or thumbs down on the people that are in office.
Or the Bears.
Or anything. Really anything.
Everything. He would like a referendum on everything.
Yes, yes.
You're not wrong there. I guess legislators get to have their say, and they did when they went well into session late last night and voted to extend until 2027. That's the Illinois House. This is not law yet, although the governor has given the thumbs up to this, a moratorium on Chicago public school closures. Now, this comes despite huge pushback from the Chicago Teachers Union and from Mayor Johnson's appointed CPS board. So, Tina, you listened to the debate. What is this about?
It was very dramatic. It's Representative Margaret Croak, Chicago state rep, who weeks ago said she wanted to have a bill that would help prevent closures of selective enrollment schools. And that was stemming from some fears that people have that they will be changing selective enrollment schools, that they will be, the emphasis of Mayor Brandon Johnson's board will be to help neighborhood schools, and that may take away some money from selective enrollment. So she started this bill to help prevent those schools from being closed. And yes, the CTU was very upset. The Illinois Federation of Teachers was very upset. The bill that passed yesterday now includes all schools, selective enrollment, and all Chicago public schools. So that just means that they cannot close those schools before an elected school board is in place. But there was a lot of back and forth. There was a CTU calling this representative racist. Representative Curtis Tarver on the floor, he said, you know, she's not my best friend, but she's not a racist. Like, you can't just go calling people racist. And I do believe that the CTU and the Illinois Federation of Teachers were calling members to tell them not to vote for this. When it was
really
just
amping up the rhetoric.
It was a lot. There was a lot of drama and a lot of, just calling a representative racist was a big deal.
It's a new step.
It's a new step, yeah.
Well, and Kim, what does this mean as the Chicago Teachers Union has issued really its opening salvo as it is bargaining for a new contract? They've got a lot of demands. Can you speak to either those demands or also just what this means for Johnson's agenda to sort of reframe how schools are budgeted and lifting up of neighborhood schools?
Well, I think this is going to be really interesting to watch because it's something that came up when Johnson won the election. He, has this history with CTU. He kind of came working with them. He has a good relationship with them. That's something we haven't seen in such a long time. So there is a lot of hope that this contract could go differently, maybe be a little less adversarial of a process than it's been. But what's interesting to me is, the Chicago Teachers Union, when I look at it from a national perspective, we might all be a little more used to it because we live here, but nationally, they really are such a unique union because they have really transformed what it means to use collective bargaining to ask for things that really were not part of the bargaining process for teachers. Obviously, they wanted certain safety provisions, better salaries, things like that. But, one of the big things as far as asking for housing, I mean, that's huge. But they've made some pretty compelling arguments that this is all part of, this is their workplace. They have to have a workplace that is, stable and invested in, and that includes having families that have affordable housing.
Can't teach a child.
I think it could be interesting. They want to make it public hearings, like they want these negotiations to be public, so we can all watch the union negotiations.
It'd be interesting for us. I wonder if they will come to regret that.
I think we've all been to CTU bargaining sessions where we're standing outside that building for a long time. So it would be really interesting to be in there,
especially in bad weather.
To listen to it. Yes.
Okay, I want to briefly get to. We have something that is pretty historic and extraordinary, Kim, and this is, of course, a president, a former one and possibly a incoming president as well, that is on trial. So how do you cover something like this, given sort of the special spectacle that is Donald Trump and also the historic nature of something along these lines?
You get there really early. I covered the Trump E. Jean Carroll defamation trial last year from the same courthouse in the Southern District of New York. You know, this is a courthouse that is famous for having some of the most high-profile cases in the country, but nothing like this. I mean, when he is on trial, you have a whole different consideration from Secret Service to, you know, staffing. And, you know, this is federal, so you have, or, you know, that's why you don't see cameras in the courtroom. That's why we're getting the courtroom sketches. There are reporters in the courtroom, and it's a limited pool. So what you see reported out is either from reporters in the courtroom or who are in the overflow room. And what we've been hearing from them is that this is just, it's weird because this is a criminal defendant who everybody in the jury knows. They might be able to be, you know, impartial or kind of hold their feelings and be selected for the jury, but everybody knows who Donald Trump is.
Everybody worldwide knows Donald
Trump.
Trump.
Most of them probably have some opinion on him.
Well, we'll be following that. I want to make sure to get to you, Annie. Onward, upward to the Chicago sky. Chicago's WNBA team is getting a couple of new players. Who are they and how big a deal is this?
Yeah, this is significant. Camila Cardoso selected number 3 overall. Angel Reese selected 7th overall. And despite the fact that both of them need to develop their game significantly to make a dent in the WNBA, they're both bringing extraordinary star power. This class is filled with elite talent. You start with Caitlin Clark, who is just a transformative player, but right after her are Camila and Angel. Truly, the Sky selected arguably the 2 biggest stars in the draft, second to the number 1 overall pick in Caitlin Clark. And so when you think about what that does for a franchise and a league that is trying to gain more attention, it just, not enough can be said.
Well, and it's happening. By the way, Angel named herself, or took on the moniker Shy Barbie. That wasn't something that I did. Bayou Barbie is now calling herself Shy Barbie. What does this mean for the Sky, not just on the court, but off the court, as you noted? Ticket sales, practice space.
We haven't I should say I haven't spoken to the team yet about how it's impacted ticket sales, but as far as their social media goes, they've already gained significant numbers on their social channels. And then when it comes to practice space, I mean, we know this is a hot button topic. The Sky currently practices out of a public rec center in Deerfield. So yes, they are the Chicago Sky, but some call them the Deerfield Sky because that's where they're located. And right now, a practice facility is necessary. We saw the Las Vegas Aces open up a $67 million practice facility. The Storm opened up their practice facility, $64 million practice facility this year. The Liberty, they share practice space with the Brooklyn Nets.
No offense to Deerfield, but the public rec center just does not stack up.
No.
You're saying.
And when you think about professional athletes and what they require, a public rec center just isn't it for professional athletes.
In terms of this, do we have a chance if they're moving into maybe a bigger space so more folks can see them? The United Center, perhaps? I know there's, a petition trying for this?
One game.
Yes.
One game.
There's 2 home games against the Fever, June 23rd and August 30th, and the June 23rd date is occupied. The United Center isn't available that date currently. August 30th, I mean, maybe we could see the Sky move over there, but after a conversation with the Sky, they said currently there's no plan to move that game, but that could always change.
Does it matter how well the Sky do with these players on the court, or is this such a bigger conversation than who wins a game?
I think this season specifically for the Sky is a rebuild season. They have a first-year coach in, they have a brand new general manager, and so that's the point about these draft picks is these draft picks were not brought in to immediately propel the Sky into championship contention. This is a year where they can take to develop. This roster is filled with role players, essentially. They traded away their franchise star in Kalia Copper, so it's an empty slate for them. And I think that benefits rookies like Camila and Angel quite well because, again, the opportunity is there for the taking. What they do with it is up to them.
And I want to move back now to politics. Thank you for that. And last, I mean, I don't have tickets. Anybody else? But it'd be very cool to see. A trial that I may be able to watch would be that of former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan. This week, Kim, we've got about 30 seconds. U.S. Supreme Court heard a case that could have an impact on the Speaker's future. The Supreme Court are trying to determine what constitutes corruption?
Yeah, it's interesting that they're weighing in on this. It's not our politicians for once. It's our neighbors over in Indiana.
Thank you, Indiana.
This is the mayor of Portage, Indiana, who's got his own corruption case. That the Supreme Court's going to look at that, and it's going to make some determinations on what corruption kind of.
I feel like all of us in Chicago have a pretty good idea of what we think it is. We will have to continue that conversation another day. Thanks so much to my all-ladies panel. Here is the new host of Week in Review. So especially thank you to Tina Spandelis of the Chicago Sun-Times, Kim Bellware of the Washington Post, Shia Kappas of Politico, and Annie Costable of the Chicago Sun-Times. Thanks so much. We'll be back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family. The Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by tonight's presentation of Chicago Tonight, Week in Review, is made possible in part by Ann and Rich Carr, Francine and Dr. Anthony Brown, and the Mullenhour Progressive Philanthropic Fund, in honor of Ida Mullenhour, supporting quality journalism.
And that is our show for this Friday night. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night. A good night, Kim. Not on a scooter. What do you think about this notion to allow them after dark?
Stay off the sidewalks.
Yeah.
Just take advantage of all those nice new bike lanes. Wear your helmet, wear your lights, but if you're a scooter, stay off the sidewalk.
Oh, but at night it's asking for trouble. I could just think about being like a young kid getting on a scooter later.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to recognize its 18 attorneys selected for the 2024 Super Lawyers List.